Alright, so we can get started by just deleting the default cube and this light here, like so. And what I like to do is just set up the camera to where I want it to be. So what I can do is just right click on the camera here, press Alt G and Alt R to clear the rotation and location. And then I will bring it back by pressing G and Y and then rotate it minus 90 degrees on the X axis. So as you can see, there is nothing in the scene. So we can start off by adding in our mountains, and there is no modeling involved when it comes to creating the mountains. You might have wondered how we are going to do that. Blender actually has a built-in feature to create landscapes. So just press Shift A and go to Mesh. And if you don't see the landscape add-on or the landscape button here, then no worries. We can just go up to Edit, Preferences, and search for the landscape add-on, as you can see here. So make sure to click that icon. However, if you did follow the train series tutorial in its entirety, you would have already added that in. So yeah, but anyway, we can just add in our landscape by pressing Shift A and add it in like so. And then to briefly explain the ANT landscape add-on, ANT stands for another noise tool, which I only literally just found out now. There are many different presets. So right now we are on Mountain 1, but there's different things such as canyons, dunes, many different things to play around with, rivers. It's really fun, and it can just make your scene look really good if you just mix and match all of these different features. So you have subdivisions, which is just the amount of vertices that are in your mesh here. You have a few other features like the size, the seed, which changes the actual type of land generated, and then a few other features here. You have a few features to change the way that your mountains look, so you can just change the noise as well. So if you bring that up, then it just looks more smooth, but if you bring that down, it looks like a mess. So I'll just keep that at 0.75. You have depth, dimension, linearity. Again, I forget what it's called, but anyway, just many different features, which for the most part we won't be touching. The only thing I will do is bring up these subdivisions. So by highlighting both fields here, I'll just bring this up to 256, and that just doubles the detail. To be fair, since these are going to be quite big, I might bring this up to like 400. So there we go. And of course, if you're not happy with the seed, you can always just change it until you get something that you like. That looks a bit too pointy and sharp, so let me just bring this down to, I don't know, just a random one that hopefully looks a bit better. Cool. And then also I'll bring up the noise size just a bit, just so that's a bit smoother. And there we go. So in the camera view, what I'll do is just bring it back to about here, and we'll just start building out our scene. So the way that I usually create these scenes is just by bashing a few things together and kind of placing them in a way that's convincing to the camera, but if you actually look at it in the 3D viewport, then it doesn't actually make sense. So in this section, we'll just be blocking out the basic shapes of our scenery. So I'll just press R, X, or Z and 90. Because I just prefer this shape to the mountain. And then what I'll do is add in another landscape as well. And change the seed maybe to a 77. These numbers literally don't mean anything. Like, they're just random seeds. So yeah, just pick one. And then just move it to about here. Go into front view and scale it up like so. So we'll just see how that looks. Maybe I'll have one slightly smaller. Sometimes it's better to have less symmetry in your scene as opposed to making things, perfectly symmetrical. Because when you have things that are, perfectly symmetrical, they just don't look as realistic. This is supposed to be a nature scenery, and nature isn't very symmetrical for the most part. Okay, one thing I'm going to do as well is change my camera settings early on. So I want to have a more cinematic look to my camera, and I will do this by changing the resolution. So in the, I think, render properties or output properties tab here, I want to change it to the 4K resolution. And that is 1492 by 1716. And there we go. We have a larger widescreen type of camera lens. And I'll say bring it up a bit here and then bring it back as well. Then the next thing I'm going to do is decrease the focal length. So for the focal length, I always like to have a shorter focal length just because that gives a more dynamic look to it. So I'll bring it back to about here. Oops. Let me bring my camera a bit forward and then we can just continue blocking out the scene. So in the render, you saw that the camera is hovering above a plane of water. So we can just press Shift A and add in a plane. And then we can just scale it up massively just so that we can see how it looks. And just bring it down or bring it to where it just starts to cut off the flat parts of the mountains. Again, you might want to just adjust the sizing and positions of the mountains. Having some overlap is also quite good as well. So now we have the mountains and we have the river. And then also what I like to add in, or what you probably saw in the render if you're looking closely, is there's a little bit of land where the trees are kind of planted around. So in reality, we would have something like, I guess the riverbank is here and all the trees will be, around here and, close to the mountains. But in reality, we'll kind of just mishmash to get them together, and the terrain will only be in the camera view around here. So the way that we can do this is by, again, pressing Shift A and going to landscape. And of course, it's going to add in another mountain. However, we do not want a mountain. We actually want a large terrain, and that is here. As you can see, we have our large terrain as promised. So what we can do is just decrease the noise or increase the noise so that it's a bit flatter. You can change the seed if you want. It doesn't make much of a difference. And I'm just checking if there's any other. I think increasing the dimension will just make things a lot less spiky. So I think when I was practicing at 1.2 was something that I was more happy with. And I think that is fine, so we can leave it for now. And what I'll do is just bring it back to about here and bring it down. So again, this is supposed to be the water and this is supposed to be the land above it. So let me just tab into edit mode and just press S and Z to flatten things just so that things will be easier to manipulate. So this is supposed to be our land. And what we want is so that our land actually kind of wraps around the camera view here. And the way that I achieved this was by using proportional editing. So what we can do is just select our object here and just bring it closer to the camera. And then just tab into edit mode and select, I guess, a couple vertices here. It doesn't matter too much which ones you select. And then press the O key for proportional editing. You can change this to smooth or sphere. Either one works fine. I think smooth actually will be a bit better for this. And then press G and Y and just move things back. But scroll up on your mouse wheel just so that we have a bit more influence over the region, so that the terrain naturally bends around our camera view. And it's important to just check your camera view just so that we can see just how it looks from the camera perspective. So I actually want these regions here to come in a bit more. So press G and Y and just bring them down to about here. I'll select these ones, press G and Y to bring them up to about here. and I am just going to play with the terrain until I get something I'm happy with. So I've selected these two vertices, then I will press S and X to just bring them in closer. Cool. So I know I scaled everything down on the Z-axis, but I do want some of that bumpiness. So I'll just press S and Z to scale up again. As you can see, it's kind of brought everything up with it, but just press G and Z to bring it down. Let's see. Cool. And then what I'll need to do is just bring the terrain down so that there's not actually any gaps in between the water and the terrain. So let me just press G and Z to bring this down a bit. Maybe I'll have to press S and Z. But one thing I'll do is just set origin to geometry, just so that when I scale things, they don't move too much. Cool. And now what we'll do is some just manual readjusting, just so that the terrain kind of meets the water or the plane at the bottom. So all of these vertices here at the edge need to be touching the water. So it's just a case of just pressing G and Z and just bringing it down with proportional editing. You don't want to bring things down too much because you do want some of the terrain to be seen. So of course this section here will need to be brought upwards. So just select the vertex and then just press G and Z to bring it up. And then the ones at the edges, they need to meet the plane. So it's about just playing around with the proportional editing feature. And hopefully you'll be getting something, that you are happy with. This one here, just press G, or just, select on your mouse wheel, or I mean your right mouse button. I'll just bring these edges even closer, just so that the camera can actually tell that there's trees kind of coming close towards the side of it. Also, what I'll do is just move the mountains back. I will be adjusting these quite a bit until I fully land on something that I'm happy with. It's just a kind of a bad habit of mine. I might even bring them closer, just depending on how I'm feeling. That seems good. And then what we can do is just continue just moving our vertices down. So just bring all of these here, just bring them down and select the ones like closer or more inwards of land, and then just bring them up. Also, there's a bunch of unused vertices here, so I can just box select them here and then press X, delete vertices, because we don't need to be wasting computational power on anything that is really not necessary. Cool. There's still something about the position of the mountains that is slightly bothering me, but I don't want to be fiddling around with them too much, so I will leave them for give me a moment. Okay, yeah. And also, one thing I should do is to have some viewport displays on, just so that I can see where exactly the center of my scene is. So that's why it was bothering me slightly. Things weren't centered and it just looked so off. Yeah, so even pressing R and X to rotate on the X-axis helps. So there we go. Now I'm much more happy with the setup. So a few more adjustments, and then we can actually move on to adding in our trees. So just press G, bring it out like so. Again, you just need to be checking your camera views, just so that yeah, just so that things look right.